Hello everyone, my name is Nitin Nahar. I welcome you all on behalf of JK Shah classes to this Inter-CA Amendment lecture for November 2021 exams. As you all know, the cutoff date for November 2021 exams is 30th April 2021. Now, we will be going through the statutory update book which is released by ICAI, and I will give you an overview and how to approach this statutory update booklet. Now, the first thing which is mentioned here that amendments up to 30th April 2021 would be applicable for your exams. Let's now straight get forward to the amendments which have been prescribed. First one is related to input tax credit. Now, there is a new mechanism which has been introduced, that is quarterly return monthly payment scheme. If a person wants, he can file quarterly returns, but payment of tax has to be done on a monthly basis. That's called as QRMP. That's a new scheme introduced. In that, there's a point called as invoice furnishing facility. You will see references to that invoice furnishing facility in these amendments. But anyways, when we are in QRMP, I will tell you what is this invoice furnishing facility. So moving to the first amendment regarding input tax credit. See, there was a rule, Rule 36(4). What did it say? Rule 36(4) said that if your suppliers have not uploaded invoices, in such cases, the ITC will be restricted to 10% of the invoices uploaded by the suppliers. I'll give you an example. Say suppose, as per your books, ITC is 100 rupees. Correct? Invoices which are uploaded, if I total this, it is coming to 80 rupees. So, how much of ITC could I claim? Earlier, the ITC which could I claim was 80 rupees plus 10% of 80. Not 10% of who have not uploaded, 10% of those who have uploaded. So, I used to claim 88 rupees. This was the law prior to the amendment. Now, what has changed? First, uploaded is changed to furnished. Sir, what difference does it make? See, uploading without submission of GSTR1 would have been reflected in GSTR2A. But now that word uploaded is deleted and now it says furnished. That means your suppliers have furnished GSTR1 or invoice furnishing facility. The moment they furnish GSTR1 or invoice furnishing facility, we will be eligible. This is the first change. And then the second change is this 10% has been reduced to 5% of 80. Now 5% of 80 would mean 84. So they have further reduced what is eligible. Now, if my supplier does not upload, then I was ineligible. Now, if he uploads but does not furnish, still I am ineligible. Now, the criteria is invoices furnished by these suppliers. Once they have furnished it, that means they have filed their GSTR1 or invoice furnishing facility. Once they have done that, I'll be eligible. Plus the rate reduction. 10% is now reduced to 5%. So now you will be eligible for 84 rupees. But don't forget one thing. ITC which is eligible for me to be claimed will never exceed my ITC as per books. I can never claim more than 100. Say suppose books is 100, invoices furnished is 100. I'll claim 100, not more than 100. Clear with this? That's the first amendment. And here it says ITC availed in respect of invoices or debit notes not uploaded. Earlier the language was uploaded and now with effect from 1st Jan 2021, the reduced percentage plus. Now it says furnished. Can you see the difference in the language? Earlier it was uploaded. Now it is changed to furnished. Okay. Then one new rule has been added, Rule 86B. Let me tell you a background behind this. See, when we talk about tax evasion, a person who is taking fake ITC, he would never pay even a single rupee through e-cash ledger. A person who is used to taking fake ITC, he will still prefer fake ITC and utilize the entire thing against output payable. He will not pay even a single rupee through e-cash ledger. Government wanted to trap these persons, and government said, I will put a restriction. What is the restriction? The restriction is that you can use ITC to the extent of 99% of output. See, what does it technically mean? When I say I can use my ITC to discharge 99% of output, that means 1% I have to pay through e-cash ledger. But tell me one thing, will it create difficulty for certain genuine cases? Yes, obviously it will create difficulty for some genuine cases, and that's why there are various conditions applicable in this. Let's understand what are the conditions applicable, because one condition, second, there are some exceptions. Exceptions meaning to these persons, Rule 86B will not be applicable. So what does 86B say? You have to pay 1% of your output tax through e-cash ledger. But to whom is it applicable and to whom it is not applicable? These are the two important things. First one, to whom is it applicable? See, it is applicable to a person whose taxable supplies exceed 50 lakh in a month, and only in that month it will apply. Sir, that means every month we have to check whether taxable supply has exceeded 50 lakh. The answer is yes. Only in the month when it exceeds 50 lakh will this restriction be applicable. Are you clear with the first point? Only when taxable supplies exceed 50 lakh in a month, only in that month you have to check whether Rule 86B is followed or not followed. Fair enough. Second point, it does not include exempt supply. Okay. It does not include zero rated supply. Sir, what is zero rated supply? Export of goods or services, supply to SEZ. These two are not considered for this 50 lakh limit. So only taxable supplies. This is the person to whom it applies. That means, can I say small taxpayers are not liable under this? The answer is yes. Small taxpayers are not liable under this. Then comes the exceptions. That is, government has provided for these persons, it is not applicable. Government has provided various exclusions. The first exclusion is the most interesting one. The first exclusion is where a person or director or two partners or managing director or whole-time director or authorized signatory being the trustee, managing trustee, if they have paid more than 1 lakh of income tax in last 2 preceding financial years. If you have paid more than 1 lakh income tax in last 2 preceding financial year, either the registered person or 2 partners or managing director or whole-time director or the managing trustee, if these persons have paid more than 1 lakh as income tax in last 2 preceding financial year, then 86B does not apply. This is the fun. Tell me one thing. Normally, a person who has more than 50 lakh turnover in a month, that is about 6 crores turnover. Tell me whether at least he will pay 1 lakh as income tax. Yes. Surely he will pay. That means government is excluding all the genuine SSEs. See, why did 86B come? 86B came so that we can trap those who are claiming fake ITC plus not paying income tax as well. That was the basic intention. So if you have paid more than 1 lakh as income tax, are you safe? The answer is yes, you are safe. But 2 preceding financial years. And it is very easy to meet this condition. Do you agree with this? Because a person who has more than 6 crore turnover will normally pay about more than 1 lakh of income tax easily. See, when this provision came, everyone was very scared that 1% you have to pay through eCash. But when you see the not applicable clause, it excludes most of them. Okay. Second is the person who has claimed a refund of more than 1 lakh. See, you don't learn GST refund in your inter-CA, but we are talking about refund under GST, not income tax. More than 1 lakh if you have claimed refund, in that case also it does not apply. Sir, what cases do we get refund? That you will learn in CA final. Like if you are an exporter, then tax paid on purchases, you get a refund. There is a concept called as inverted tax structure. In such cases where you have claimed more than 1 lakh of refund, still this condition will not be applicable. Rule 86B is not applicable. You are not required to pay 1% through eCash ledger. Third one, government department. Yes, as expected, sir. Government department, public sector undertaking, local authority, not liable to pay 1% through eCash. And last one is a person who has cumulatively paid 1% up to the said month in financial year. I'll give you an example. Up to the said month in financial year. See this carefully. Say suppose April month my output tax was 10 lakh. ITC was 8 lakh. So I have paid 2 lakh through eCash ledger. Yes. May month 10 lakh, 7 lakh. That means 3 lakh I have paid through eCash ledger. June output tax 10 lakh, but my ITC was very high because I made lot of purchases. So as I made lot of purchases, I had 11 lakh. So nothing was payable through eCash. In fact, I had a excess ITC of 1 lakh which was carried forward. In such cases, the question is whether for the month of June, this restriction of 86B should be applicable. See, normally everyone will get excluded from the first clause itself. More than 1 lakh income tax. That is the most easiest thing. But say suppose someone is not covered under this and cumulatively he pays that much of tax. Again, he will not be covered under 86B. Let me show it to you. See, total output tax till June is 30 lakh. Tell me 30 lakh into 1% is how much? Sir, 30 lakh into 1% is basically 30,000, sir. Sure, na? Yes. So 30 lakh into 1% is 30,000. Has he paid more than 30,000 cumulatively? Sir, yes, he has paid more than that. He has paid 5 lakh till now. So should the restriction apply for him for June? No. But say suppose this instead of June, this happened in April. If it happens in the first month of the financial year, then you'll have to pay 1%. But please understand one thing. Most of the persons will get outside this because of the first one. Clear? Yes. Rule 86B, very important for your exams. What does Rule 86B say? This was introduced with effect from 1st Jan. 99% is what you can use. Only when taxable supply exceed 50 lakh. And the law says other than exempt supply and zero rated supply. Then there is an example given here. Exceptions. This is the most important thing. Let's see. First one, where the person, proprietor, karta, managing director or two partners, whole time directors have paid more than 1 lakh of income tax in last 2 financial years. There's a point that the time limit for filing return should have been expired. That based on that you have to check. But this much is sufficient, last 2 financial years. And then he has claimed refund of more than 1 lakh in preceding financial year. Third, cumulatively he has discharged 1% up to the said month. And last one, government department, public sector undertaking, local authority, statutory body. Plus, there is one power, the commissioner or officer authorized may remove the restrictions after verifying whether he is a genuine assessee. Understand the purpose, fake ITC. So these persons were claiming fake ITC and never paying anything through output. That's the reason government wanted to trap them. Understood? Okay, great. So these were the 2 amendments in ITC chapter. Then comes registration. See, registration, what was added for the previous exams was Aadhaar authentication. Now there have been further modifications. Let me tell you the modifications, then I will show it to you. See this. Now, Aadhaar authentication. See, Aadhaar authentication, case 1 is where you have completed it. Okay. Case 2 is where you don't opt for it when you are required to, or you fail to complete it. And sir, what is Aadhaar authentication? See, when you file your registration application, hyperlink will be received on your email and you will have to click on that. Once you click on the hyperlink, it will tell you to enter your Aadhaar number. The moment you enter Aadhaar number, one OTP will come to your mobile number. Enter the OTP, Aadhaar authenticated. That's it. Verifying that Aadhaar is there for this authorized signature. That's the basic purpose. If you don't opt for it or if you fail to complete it, because Aadhaar authentication once opted should be completed within 15 days. If a person does not opt for it or fails to complete it within 15 days, then what was the law say? Now what is the change? See, if a person does not for it, then in that case, the time limit for application to be processed by proper officer has been increased to 30 days. Earlier, this was 7 days. And before that, it was 3 days. So first 3 working days was enhanced to 7 working days. And here, when you don't opt, 21 days was there, which has now become 30 days. So there have been lot of changes. Ignoring all the changes, you should know what is applicable for your exams. So if a person does not opt for Aadhaar authentication or fails to complete it, officer has 30 days time to issue notice or grant registration. Okay. Sir, if I have completed, then 7 working days. This is the time allowed to the officer to issue a notice or grant registration. Now, once he grants registration, game over. But if he issues a notice, then we get 7 working days, and once we file our reply, officer has 7 working days to process the application again. That remains same. See, the process after this remains same. Reply and further time. These 2 points remain same. There is no change in the law regarding these 2 points. Reply to be filed within 7 working days. Thereafter, once you have filed the reply, the officer has to now check and again verify and pass a decision within 7 working days, otherwise deemed registration. Remember? Okay. Sir, now he has 30 days. If he does not take action within 30 days, then you will get a deemed registration. That remains same. And here 7 working days? Yes. Plus, one more point has been added. Say suppose you have completed Aadhaar authentication, but officer deems it necessary that physical verification of the premise should be done before grant of registration. If officer deems it necessary that physical verification of the premise should be done before granting of registration, and he takes an approval from an officer, ACDC, Assistant Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner. If he has taken this approval, then in that case, again 30 days is the time which is allowed to the officer to complete the physical verification and grant me registration. That means, if I were to sum up this, does it mean that Aadhaar authenticated 30 days cannot apply? Does it mean Aadhaar authentication completed 30 days will not apply? The answer is no. Now the officer has a power that if he deems it fit, and this is his discretion, because the law is saying if he deems it fit, then in that case he will say physical verification is necessary, and only after physical verification I will grant registration. In such case, he again gets 30 days time. Sir, why has government done all this? Simple reason. Some fake registrations and everyone else has to suffer. Some fake registrations, some tax evasions done, everyone suffers today. At present, as does the officer have a power to delay registration? The answer is yes. Clear with this? Yes. To sum up, there are 3 critical points where 30 days time limit will apply. Otherwise, you get deemed registration after 30 days. In a normal scenario, 7 working days is applicable. Now, what are those 3 cases? Case 1, does not opt for Aadhaar authentication. Case 2, fails to complete Aadhaar authentication within 15 days of opting for Aadhaar authentication. Case 3, where officer deems it fit that registration should be granted only after physical verification. In these 3 cases, 30 days will be applicable. Sir, in any other case, 7 working days, if officer does not take any action, deemed registration. Are you clear? Yes. Okay. Plus, one more important point is, there are some people who are not required to authenticate Aadhaar. So they are not required to authenticate Aadhaar. Now tell me, if they are not required to authenticate Aadhaar, does it matter whether they have opted or not opted? It doesn't matter. Sir, who are these persons? Someone who is not a citizen of India, government department, local authority, statutory body, public sector undertaking, and UIN. A person who is applying for unique identification number, UN or embassy. These are not required to authenticate Aadhaar. Clear? Let's see the points from the statutory update book. See this. This you can delete because it says the above notification has been superseded. So this is now not applicable. This was applicable earlier. Now few persons have been exempted. Who are these exempted from Aadhaar authentication? Person not a citizen, department of government, local authority, statutory body, PSU, and a person applying for unique identification number. Then revised time limit. What I would suggest you is, instead of going through this, you read this. See this. This is a better diagram which contains the entire thing. 3 things. 30, 7 working days, 7 working days. This is the sum up. Registration will be granted after physical verification of the premise. Who fails to undergo Aadhaar authentication? Case 1. Who does not opt for Aadhaar authentication? Case 2. Or where proper officer deems it fit that physical verification should be done. case 3. These 3 cases 30 days. In any other case 7 working days, and after proper officer has issued a notice 7 working days. This is no change. This is same as previous. What has changed is this 30 and 7. Clear? Oh, yeah. Then you have new points in cancellation of registration. See, the officer can suo moto cancel the registration. Already, if you have not furnished bank account, that point was there. Goods without invoice, services without invoice, or you are carrying on a business from a place other than registered place. This was already there. Now, government has added 2 more points in this. And what are those 2 points? You'll find it here. 1. Avails ITC in violation of section 16. That means section 16, 4 conditions to avail ITC. You have the invoice, you have received the goods or services, supplier has paid the tax, you have filed a valid return. If you have taken ITC breaking these conditions, then officer can cancel it. And next 2 points are related to 86B, which is read above. We discussed ITC chapter 86B, and there is a mismatch between GSTR1 and GSTR3B. Sir, how can there be a mismatch between GSTR1 and 3B? So I have reported everything in my GSTR1 as sales, but in 3B I show a lower turnover. So GSTR1 I have reported a turnover of 100 rupees. 3B I am discharging tax only on 90. Even in such cases, the registration can be cancelled. Understood? Plus, it's not just this. Because of the increase in the tax evasion cases, they have added a special power to proper officer, which is very harsh. It says that proper officer can suspend the registration if he finds significant difference. Now the word significant difference is not defined. So significant difference is very subjective. If he finds significant difference, then in that case, he can suspend the registration. And you know what is the impact when he suspends the registration? A person cannot make taxable supplies. He will not be able to collect tax. Plus, he is not required to file GST return, which comes along with it. So, a special power added, officer may do an analysis, and if he finds significant mismatch. Sir, what analysis will he do? He will compare GSTR1 sales with GSTR3B sales. He will compare input tax credit claimed with what invoices are uploaded by the supplier, which is now changed to furnish. This is what he will check. And the law is so open-ended. It says, or such other analysis. It is giving too much power to the officers, where officers now have the discretion to suspend the registration. Once the registration is suspended, they will give 30 days time to reply. And thereafter, they can decide on cancellation or keeping the registration as it is. So here 30 days time is given to reply. New rule, Rule 21A. Coming directly to the point, C. Suspension. Where the proper officer has reason to believe that the registration has to be cancelled, he can now suspend the registration pending cancellation proceeding without giving a reasonable opportunity. Dangerous. He will suspend it immediately. Thereafter, he will give 30 days time to reply. Then, where a comparison of returns furnished by registered person under 39. 39 is GSTR3B for a regular dealer, compared with GSTR1 or details of inward supply, that is GSTR2A to B, or such other analysis, and finds significant difference, then in that case his registration will be suspended. And obviously they will send a communication and he will have 30 days time. Did you understand this? Yes? Okay. Then we move on to tax invoice, credit note, debit note, e-way bill. Now what is the change which has happened here? First, let me tell you, we have two concepts, e-invoice and one is for dynamic QR code in respect of B2C transactions. See, even today, dynamic QR code is not active. I mean, there has been an exemption which is given till 30th September 2021 that if you don't follow dynamic QR code, then there will be no consequences. That is the notification at present when this video is being made. So dynamic QR code at present is not being used, but Institute has given a circular and points related to dynamic QR code. So once we will go through it. First, e-invoice is necessary for any person whose turnover has crossed more than 50 crore in any of the preceding financial years starting from 1718. From 1718 till 2021, for any financial year, if the turnover has exceeded 50 crore, then e-invoice is applicable to such person. Okay. E-invoice is required for two transactions. One is B2B transactions, that is registered person to registered person. Second one is exports. These are the two things where e-invoice is required. And what is e-invoice? You send the data to a electronic portal. For example, you send the data to this website einvoice1.gst.gov.in. Like this, there are 10 portals. You send the data. This will throw a IRN, invoice reference number, and this invoice reference number will have to be printed on the invoice, which is in a QR code. Sir, what is this QR code? You have seen that black portion where you can scan. That QR code should be there on the invoice. That becomes a e-invoice. Authenticity. That's the basic objective. Dynamic QR code even today is required only if the turnover exceeds more than 500 crores. And for what is it required? Is it required for B2B and export? No. For that we already have e-invoice. This is required only in B2C transaction. Sir, here also QR code is there. Here also QR code is there. What is the difference? QR code in case of e-invoice contains invoice reference number. An officer can scan it. He will get to know the invoice reference number. He will get to know when was this generated. Dynamic QR code will contain payment details. Say suppose a customer wants to pay online. He can scan that QR code on the e-invoice and make the payment. That is dynamic QR code, which has to be printed on the invoice, which is issued to B2C. Why was this done? So that consumers can scan on the invoice. They will get to know the storekeeper's bank account details, UPI ID. They will get to know. Based on that, they can make an online payment. That's the basic motive. Sir, why has government done this? So that there is track of each payment received against a particular invoice. B2C customers, they want to track who is paying. That's the basic objective. Plus, it also gives comfort to the consumers, where consumers can just scan and pay it. The storekeeper will not have an option to say a no. He will not have an option to say or insist on cash payment. That's the basic objective. Now, there were a lot of confusions regarding dynamic QR code, and that's the reason government has come up with various clarifications. We will see these clarifications. First thing is, what is required in a dynamic QR code? If I am providing a cross-reference through another device, is it sufficient? If a person pays cash, even if I have displayed QR code, will I be held liable? Such questions have been answered by CBIC. In fact, it has been further amended, but that is not applicable. We are sticking to what is given in the statutory updates. Now, let's have a look at these two aspects. So, e-invoice, first it was 500 crores, then reduced to 100. What is applicable for your exams is 50 crore. with effect from 1st April 2021. Fine. This diagram is given. What was the impact? Notification number not required. Then, before discussing this e-way bill amendment, I'll just come to dynamic QR code, that is point number 4. How does it start? All B2C invoices issued by a registered person whose aggregate turnover in preceding financial year from any preceding financial year starting from 17-18 exceeds 500 crores is mandatorily required to have a dynamic QR code on the invoice. That's the point. Now coming to clarifications. This is same. Resultantly, dynamic QR code is required by a person whose turnover exceeds 500 crores. Now coming to the clarifications. See the first one. It says non-applicability of dynamic QR code. For some persons, dynamic QR code is not required. Who are those persons? This list is same as the list which is there in B2B, that is e-invoicing. Let's see. First one, insurance company, banking company, financial institution, GTA, supplier of passenger transport service, admission or exhibition of cinematographic film in multiplex cinema, that is excluded. And the last one, OIDAR is not applicable. If you see the footnote, it says it has been discussed at final level. So you have to only focus on these four, which is same as whatever was mentioned for e-invoice. Clear? Then for exports not required. Why no dynamic QR for the exports? Simple. For exports we are generating e-invoice. This is not required. Okay. Then parameters or details to be captured in dynamic QR code. What should dynamic QR code contain? One big list is there. It shall contain supplier's GST number, UPI ID, payee's bank account and IFSC, invoice number, invoice date, total value, GST amount. All this should be there in this dynamic QR code. A person will be able to scan and pay. Clear? Okay. Further, dynamic QR code should be such that it can be scanned to make a digital payment. Okay. Now, coming to the compliance point. Whether if I have displayed dynamic QR code, but the customer says I want to pay in cash, can I say no, pay online payment? That's not necessary. That's the first case. See this. If a supplier displays dynamic QR code, but customer opts to pay without dynamic QR code and supplier provides cross-reference of the payment on the invoice, is it sufficient compliance? CBIC has said it is sufficient compliance. See, the basic target is to track and not to force customers that you pay through dynamic QR code only. So can you make payment through cash or a UPI ID separately, or just a scan of a particular logo or a particular sticker which is there? That is also sufficient. So government has provided that UPI modes can be used, cash transactions can be used, no problem, until and unless you are maintaining payment details. That's sufficient. In fact, if you see case 2, you will get much more clarity. See this. If a supplier makes available customer electronic mode of payment, maybe through a sticker which says you can scan and pay, I provided that, where though dynamic QR code is not displayed, but details of merchant and transactions are captured. So in that it will be captured for which invoice it is. In such case, cross-reference, is it sufficient? Intention is to create a trail, create a check. That's the intention. Once that is there, it is sufficient. That's what CBIC has clarified. If cross-reference is there, sufficient. In fact, see the third one, prepaid invoices. Like when you make an online purchase and you have already paid for it, prepaid orders, then dynamic QR code, what will you do? Because you have already paid the amount. Once you have already paid the amount, what will you do using that dynamic QR code? So the industry asked whether in such cases dynamic QR code is required. Again, CBIC's same answer. Cross-reference is sufficient. If you have the cross-reference, it is deemed that you have complied with QR code provisions. And last one is, if I am selling through online website and that online website has this facility where they can track each payment, and that happens. In online website, they track each order and each payment. In such cases, is dynamic QR necessary? Again, CBIC says same thing. If cross-reference is given. See, it applies to the supplier. The provisions apply to the supplier. But if cross-reference is provided, sufficient. Government wants to track these transactions. That's the basic motive. Did you understand this? Yes? Okay. Now, there are two amendments in e-way bill. We'll just discuss that now. See, e-way bill, first, you had a validity clause. For every 100 kilometer or part thereof, you used to get 1 day. In such cases, now the limit is enhanced. This 100 kilometer is replaced by 200 kilometers. So for every 200 kilometers or part thereof, you get 1 day. That's the only change. Over dimensional cargo, it remains same. See, over dimensional cargo, for every 20 kilometers or part thereof, you get 1 day's time. That is same. What has changed is that 100 kilometer for other than over dimensional cargo or other than multimodal transport has now been changed to 200. That's the only change. Understood? Okay. So there's an example given, 500 kilometers. Earlier 5 days, now 3. Oh, great. Then blocking of e-way bill generation. Important. See, if a person has not filed a GST return for 2 months, then he will not be able to generate e-way bill. This was the provision. Now what has changed? This 2 months is replaced by 2 tax periods. Sir, how does it make a difference? 2 months versus 2 tax periods. Now, I told you at the beginning of this video, QRMP scheme has come. Quarterly return, monthly payment scheme. Quarterly return, monthly payment scheme. Now, in this quarterly return, monthly payment scheme, GSTR 1 and 3B can be filed quarterly. So tell me, for a quarterly filer, what would be the tax period? Sir, for a quarterly filer, tax period will be 3 months. Clear? For a monthly filer, 1 month. That's why 2 months is replaced by 2 tax periods. So for monthly filer, 2 months. For quarterly filer, 2 quarters. Clear? Okay. Plus, if a person's registration is suspended, he will not be able to generate e-way bill. That's another important point, which has been added in 138E. A person whose registration has been suspended, again, he will not be able to generate e-way bill. Clear? Okay. Important provision. So this was about invoice and e-way bill. Now we take our discussion to the last segment, that is GST returns. See, the entire process of filing has been modified to a certain extent. Now for this QRMP, you will refer to the revision video of returns. In the revision video of returns, this is dealt in detail. You can see that revision video of returns. You will get a hang of starting of returns till the QRMP end. Everything is covered there. I will just touch some important points here so that if you are going through this, it becomes easy for you to. I'll just touch upon some important points. But for this, you will watch returns revision video. Entire scheme is explained in detail. Okay. Now, what is this QRMP? I'll just mark some important points. you can understand from the term quarterly return, monthly payment. So return can be filed quarterly, but payment of tax has to be done on a monthly basis. Some important points here is who is eligible? A person whose aggregate turnover is up to 5 crore. Circle the word preceding financial year. This is one important point. Second is when can you exercise it? First day of the second month of previous quarter till last day of the first month of the relevant quarter. Just mark this and keep. You will get the detail in that revision video. Mark this and keep. Don't miss this example. Then invoice furnishing facility. Again, you will see that video. You will get to know invoice furnishing facility is to safeguard a particular sequence. Then again you have details regarding 2A, GSTR 2A. GSTR 2A, basically once your supplier files it, GSTR 2A gets updated. Your GSTR 2A gets updated once your supplier is filed. But the problem which was being faced was 2A was dynamic document. What do I mean when I say dynamic? It used to keep changing. Anytime my supplier has filed, 2A used to keep changing. So the issue was, how do I track this 2A? Then came GSTR 2B, which gets generated on 14th of every month. And based on this 14th of every month GSTR 2B, you can claim input tax credit. So at present, is there a tool available where you can track which supplier has furnished the details when? The answer is yes. 2B helps you to track that information. Every 14th, you will get this GSTR 2B and you can check who all have filed till 13th. Sir, if someone files on 14th, it will come in next month's GSTR 2B. And based on this 2B, you have to claim input tax credit. That was the beginning of this amendment lecture, Rule 36(4), 5%. You remember that 5%? That 10% changed to 5%. That 5% of what? 5% of eligible ITC as per GSTR 2B. So this GSTR 2B, you will read from here. Once you have seen the last returns video. And then you will be able to track it easily. See, July month it will get generated on 14th August. Every next month 14th. Okay. Now GSTR 3B, there are two dates in QRMP, 22nd and 24th. Here the states are given. States not required to remember all these states. But see, for some states 22nd, for some states 24th. Why sir? Why this? Simple reason. So that the traffic on the portal and the load on the GST portal can be split, can be reduced. Not everyone rushes on the due date. So due date for some states 22nd, for some states 24th. And then you'll find this fixed sum and self-assessment, but I'll just mark this. These 2 points on page number 33. You'll have to read applicability of interest. This is also discussed in that video, but I want you to read this. Finally, late fee for quarterly return will apply based on that quarterly return. And then GSTR 1 due date. See, for QRMP scheme, the due date is 13th and for others, it would be 11th. Clear? Okay. So, your process will be, you will complete watching that revision video of returns and then whatever I have marked here, that you will go through. Yes. So with this, finally we come to an end of this amendment video. Wishing you all the best. See you all.